Welcome to SFE, Speak Fluent English, the podcast designed to help you train your ear, gain confidence, and speak English fluently in real-life situations. Whether you're just starting or looking to refine your skills, this is the place. For you, I'm Sofía, and together with David and Valeria, we explore different ways to make English learning simple and effective.
Welcome to SFE, Speak Fluent English, the podcast where we teach you to speak English with confidence and without fear. I'm David, and today I want to talk about a topic that can truly change the way you learn English. Let me tell you, when I started, I thought I had to learn thousands of words, memorize grammar rules, and repeat phrases from boring books. Years later, I realized that real progress came when I started speaking, not just studying. And this is where shadowing comes in, a method nobody talks about, but that can accelerate your learning incredibly. Now, I know many of you have spent years in school studying English. Yet when you see a native speaker, your tongue freezes. That's because the traditional system has conditioned us to think about rules and structures instead of helping us communicate naturally. Today, alongside, we're going to debunk that myth and show you how you can start improving your English right now.
Absolutely. David, I remember when I started learning English by watching TV series. It was a disaster at first, because I tried to translate everything in my head. I got frustrated when I didn't understand every word and didn't realize that context was the most important thing. When I started doing shadowing, my comprehension improved a lot, and best of all, my pronunciation became more natural. So, if you feel like your pronunciation isn't great or that you speak too slowly because you're translating in your head, this method can help you. Today we'll explain how it works, and at the end, we'll give you a pronunciation challenge. But first, Valeria is late again. She probably had another adventure on the way.
Let's talk a bit about why the traditional method for learning English doesn't work as well as it should. I spent years learning from books and structured classes, yet when I had my first real conversation in English, I felt like I couldn't say anything fluently. Has this happened to you? I'm sure it has. They make us memorize word lists without context, teach us grammar rules like mathematical formulas, and ask us to repeat meaningless phrases. But the worst part is that they make us afraid of making mistakes, and that's what really holds us back. Think about it. In school, we are taught to write before we speak, and when we finally have to speak, we feel like we don't have enough practice. And here's where we go wrong. We believe that English is learned with the mind, but in reality, it's learned with the mouth through practice.
Exactly. We have to mention that in a traditional class, there is a rigid structure that doesn't adapt to students' real needs. For example, instead of focusing on speaking, we spend too much time on writing exercises. And of course, when the time comes to have a conversation, our brain is searching for grammar rules instead of just communicating naturally. This leads to frustration. Did you know that 85% of people who study English for years still don't feel confident speaking? It's a huge problem. But here's where shadowing comes in. This method breaks down those barriers and forces us to think in English from the start.
Let's talk about shadowing. Imagine you are learning English the way a small child learns their language. A child doesn't study grammar rules or do written exercises. What they do is listen, imitate, and repeat. And that's exactly what shadowing does. This method is super simple but incredibly effective because it trains your listening skills, pronunciation, and fluency all at the same time. Here's how it works. You listen to a native speaker. You repeat immediately, copying their pronunciation and rhythm. You don't translate, just imitate. The best.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving deep into something that I think a lot of you have probably been wondering about. How to improve English pronunciation. We found some really cool articles and research all about a technique called shadowing, and I think you'll be surprised how simple this is.
It really is. And you know, it's amazing to me how shadowing can actually improve your overall fluency, not just your pronunciation.
Okay, so let's break this down. What exactly is shadowing?
Well, shadowing is basically, mimicking a native speaker's audio almost simultaneously, like you're their shadow, echoing every word. And the goal here isn't to be a perfect copycat, but to immerse yourself in the rhythm, the stress, and the intonation of English.
So it's more about like capturing the feel of the language than just like saying the words correctly.
Exactly. It's about training your ear and your voice to work together instinctively. And speaking of instinctive learning, one of our sources talks about this hyperpolyglot, Alexander Arguez, and he supposedly learned over 50 languages, partly through shadowing. He'd be out speed walking and shadowing his target language.
Wow, that's serious dedication. But I gotta ask, is there any, science behind this? combining like physical activity with language learning.
There might be. Some research suggests that physical activity can actually keep you more alert and more engaged, which could boost your memory and learning. But with Arguelles, it wasn't just about walking. He had a very deliberate method. He'd actually break down his shadowing practice into specific steps, focusing on pronunciation, rhythm, and even memorization.
Interesting. So he wasn't just like mindlessly repeating what he heard.
Not at all. He was actively analyzing the language, breaking it down, and rebuilding it in his mind. And I think that's a key point. Shadowing isn't passive listening. It's about active engagement with the language.
So let's talk about those specific benefits. Like, how does shadowing actually help you become more fluent?
Well, fluency isn't just about knowing vocabulary and grammar. It's about delivering those words and sentences in a way that sounds natural and effortless. And that's really where shadowing comes in.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this all connects. But can we like break it down even further? What are the specific areas where shadowing can really like make a difference?
Absolutely. Let's start with pronunciation. Shadowing helps train your mouth muscles to make those specific English sounds that might not exist in your native language. It's like giving your tongue a workout.
That makes total sense. I know from experience how tricky some of those English sounds can be. So what about things like, intonation and rhythm?
Shadowing is fantastic for that, too. You start to pick up on, the subtle rises and falls of speech that convey so much meaning. And you also get a feel for the natural flow of stressed and unstressed syllables, which is what gives English its musicality.
So instead of sounding like a robot reading from a textbook, you start to sound more like a native speaker.
Exactly. You're internalizing the nuances of spoken English, not just the written form. And speaking of research, a study from the National Taiwan University found that shadowing significantly improves intonation, fluency, and word pronunciation.
That's impressive. It sounds like shadowing is like a secret weapon for language learners.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to admit, the idea of like walking around, muttering to myself like Arguelles, kind of feels intimidating.
Well, you don't have to go to that extreme. And remember, that initial awkwardness is worth pushing past for those fluency gains.
You've convinced me.
Yeah.
So let's get into like the practical side of this. Like, what are some tips for getting started with shadowing?
Great question. One of the first things to consider is material. Choose something you actually enjoy. It could be podcasts, TV shows, audiobooks, even music.
That's great advice. Make it fun so you'll stick with it. And our sources also mention some specific resources too, like TED Talks,
Right.
Youglish, and movie clips.
And think about, what you want to achieve with shadowing. Are you focusing on specific sounds? Do you want to work on your intonation or rhythm? There's a wealth of material out there, so finding something that aligns with your goals is really important.
Okay, so we've got the material, we're motivated, but how do we actually do shadowing?
Yeah.
Do we just like put on our headphones and start mimicking?
Well, you can, but there are some strategies that can make it even more effective. One tip our sources mention is to start with a transcript, especially if you're new to shadowing. It helps you follow along and catch those tricky words or phrases.
Okay, that makes sense. But you probably want to wean yourself off the transcript eventually, right?
Exactly. Think of the transcript like training wheels. You use them at first, but as you get more comfortable, you can try ditching the transcript and just focusing on your listening and mimicking.
So it's all about training your ear to pick up on those subtle details.
Precisely. And that brings us to another key point, short bursts. Don't try to shadow for hours on end. Instead, aim for like 10 to 15 minutes at a time. It's better to have focused, high-quality practice than to burn yourself out.
Quality over quantity. I like that. So what are some things we can focus on during those like short bursts?
Well, let's go back to those three components of fluency we discussed earlier: pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. When you're shadowing, pay attention to how the speaker forms specific sounds. Try to mimic the shape of their mouth and the movement of their tongue.
So it's almost like you're becoming an actor, studying the physicality of speech.
That's a great analogy. And for intonation, listen for those subtle rises and falls in their voice. Pay attention to where they emphasize certain words or phrases. It's those subtle changes in pitch that convey meaning and emotion.
And what about rhythm? How can we improve that through shadowing?
Rhythm is all about the timing and stress patterns of speech. Notice which words the speaker emphasizes and how they group words together. You can even tap your foot or clap along to get a feel for the beat of the language.
That's a cool tip. It makes it more interactive and fun too. But I imagine all this mimicking can feel a bit strange at first.
It can be, But remember, everyone feels a bit self-conscious when they're learning something new. The key is to just focus on the process, not the outcome. Just relax, have fun with it, and don't be afraid to experiment.
I love that. So we've covered a lot of practical tips, but let's zoom out for a moment. Like, why should our listener even care about all this? What's the big picture here?
That's a great question. In a world obsessed with grammar rules and vocabulary lists, it's easy to forget that language is ultimately about communication, about connecting with others, expressing ourselves and sharing ideas.
And shadowing can help us do that more effectively.
Exactly. Shadowing helps you bridge that gap between knowing the rules and actually using them in a natural, flowing way. It's like training your ears and your voice to instinctively feel the language, not just think about it.
It's like learning to dance, right? You can study the steps all you want, but until you feel the rhythm in your body, you're not really dancing.
That's a perfect analogy. And shadowing helps you develop that instinctive feel for the rhythm and flow of spoken English. It's like internalizing the muscle memory of fluency.
So it's not just about sounding more natural. It's about feeling more confident and comfortable when you speak.
Absolutely. And that confidence can make a world of difference in how others perceive you and how you feel about yourself.
So to recap, shadowing can improve pronunciation,
Yeah.
intonation, rhythm fluency, and even confidence. Sounds like a pretty powerful technique.
It really is. And it's a technique that anyone can use, regardless of their level. Even native speakers can benefit from shadowing to fine-tune their accents or work on specific pronunciation challenges.
Okay, I'm sold. What stood out to you from everything we've talked about so far? Any particular shadowing tips or resources that caught your attention?
For me, I think the emphasis on choosing material you enjoy is crucial. Shadowing shouldn't feel like a chore. If you're engaged and having fun, you're more likely to stick with it and see results. What about you? What resonated with you?
Yeah, I think for me it was that idea of shadowing being like training wheels for your ears. Like you said, it's about gradually developing that like feel for the language.
It is, and that's what's so exciting about shadowing, It's not just about memorizing rules. It's about tapping into that like innate musicality that we all have
Right.
and letting it guide our pronunciation and intonation and our rhythm.
It's almost like we're relearning how to listen, not just to the words, but to like the way they're spoken, the way they flow together.
Exactly. And the more you shadow, the more attuned you become to all those little nuances. It's like your brain starts to anticipate what's coming next, and your mouth just follows along.
That's pretty cool. Like you're training your subconscious to speak English.
That's where the magic happens. You're not thinking about the rules or pronunciation anymore. You can focus on the message you're trying to get across, the connection you want to make.
So it's not just about sounding like a native speaker. It's about thinking like one, feeling the language.
Exactly. And that's a level of fluency that goes way beyond textbooks and vocab lists.
It's about owning the language, making it part of you.
Who knows, maybe you'll even be speed walking and shadowing like Alexander Arguelles one day.
Maybe. But for now, I think we've given everyone listening plenty to think about. What's the one thing you want them to remember from this whole deep dive?
I'd say this. If you really want to improve your spoken English, don't underestimate shadowing. It's a simple but powerful technique. It can unlock a whole new level of fluency and confidence.
So find some audio you love, set aside 10 or 15 minutes a day, and step into the shadow of a native speaker. You might be surprised how quickly you start to sound. More natural, more confident, like the fluent English speaker you've always wanted to be.
Happy shadowing.
The best part about shadowing is that you can do it anytime and with any material, a movie, a TV show, a podcast, or even songs. But, and this is important, you must do it correctly for it to really work. Let's do a test. Listen to this phrase from a movie and repeat at the same time that I speak. I'll be back. Now you at home, repeat, I'll be back. See how simple it is. Just by doing this daily, you are already training your mind to think in English. But, be careful, there are common mistakes you must avoid.
Mistake. #1. Speaking without understanding the meaning. Before repeating something, make sure you understand the context. If you repeat like a parrot without knowing what you're saying, you're not learning correctly.
Mistakes are reading. Instead of listening, the idea is to train your ear, not your sight. If you depend on written text, you're missing out on the auditory component, which is what you need to improve the most.
Mistake number 3. Using audios that are too difficult. Don't try to do shadowing with content that's way above your level. Start with simple phrases and gradually increase the difficulty.
Guys, you won't believe what happened.
Valeria, late again. What happened this time?
I tried to do shadowing on the subway, and now people think I talk to myself. I'm sorry, sir. Do you know where the station is?
Valeria, taking it to the extreme. Let's do a challenge. Repeat this phrase with good pronunciation. She sells seashells by the seashore. Great job. Practice every day and you'll see the difference. See you in the next episode of SFE, Speak Fluent English.
Thanks for listening to SFE, Speak Fluent English. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with a friend who's also learning English. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.